Hey everybody, this is Perch, and this is one of the most requested videos that I've gotten for doing the numbers here, and it's Miss Marvel. Now, why are people requesting this? I think it's a combo of people legitimately want to know how this title has been doing. Marvel marketing keeps hyping this title as being the smash hit that everybody absolutely loves, and I think as soon as you start doing that, people want to say, yeah, all right, does everybody actually love it, or is this marketing? And so that's part of it, but I think the other part is people want to dunk on Miss Marvel. So this video is going to give a little bit to everyone. So as you get into the numbers, it actually paints a pretty interesting picture. It explains a few things. It also introduces the effect of overships and what it has to the series and what it can do. And it this is an interesting little analysis. You'll see as we go. Miss Marvel fundamentally has had three volumes that we're talking about here. Volume 1 and 2 were by Willow Wilson, and Volume 3 was by Saladin Ahmed. And it's interesting to kind of trace the three. So for what it's worth, Volume 1 of Miss Marvel was Marvel marketed it as a first Muslim superhero made for kids, everything else. But the marketing machine that they used was, they did a couple articles for issue number 1, and then it got very quiet. Miss Marvel did not have a big marketing blitz in Volume 1 that it did for Volume 2. So if we look at the sales for Volume 1, it launches at 50,000 copies. And then it drops, but it has a very tiny drop from number 1 to number 2. You'll notice it's pretty much about 4,000 copies, which is very unusual. Then we get the more traditional Marvel drop down to about 32,000 for issue 3. And I'm going to use issue 3 as my benchmark here as I'm going through all this stuff rather than 6. And reason being, Miss Marvel was not doing your kind of what I would call your classic 6-issue arcs. They were doing a lot more in 3s. And so, you know, we get the drop to 32, but then here's where a bunch of interesting things happen. So first of all, right there at issue 6, Marvel does an overship, and I'm representing these by the little green label there of the title, so you can kind of see how it plays out over time. And the overship helps a bit. They didn't do a major overship with this title, and I've done videos explaining what overships is. If you're confused right now, search overships in my channel, and you'll get a really detailed explanation of what's going on there. But it's basically where the comic store orders, say, 100 copies, and Marvel sends them 120 copies. And they do that for marketing reasons. They do that to kind of say, hey, we know you're going to be interested in this title. We want you to promote it a little bit more. Here's some, quote unquote, free copies for you. Now, the shop gets charged for the shipping, but they don't get charged for those issues. So it's a free marketing push Marvel does when they're trying to juice a title. And we see it really come into effect here. But generally speaking, as we go, down there, we have a low point of 29,000, basically just under 30,000 for this first arc. And that's hitting on issue 12. Then we bounce back up, and our series ends at 31,408. Now, why is this interesting? Because if you look at issue 3 to issue 19, which is a decent amount, I mean, 16 comics in today's age, it's like 50 years from compared to the 70s. It is, you look at the numbers, they're holding. So if you look at it from this context, you do draw one conclusion. For a Marvel book, this was successful in holding its audience. Now, the challenge with this book was 31,000 is just not terribly compelling numbers. So it's kind of a good news, bad news thing. The good news is it held its audience way better than other Marvel books. It's very, very stable. The bad news is it wasn't ever growing that audience. So it never, it didn't go back up to 50. It's one of on the bottom end of Marvel titles, but a stable Marvel title. So by all accounts, you call that a success if you're Marvel. But then we get to Volume 2. So with Volume 2, now Marvel is, there way some critical acclaim had come. Miss Marvel, people are liking it. So Marvel goes to Secret Wars, and then they relaunch the book with a brand new number 1. And that comic sells just under 80,000 copies. And they put a bunch of press around it. They've got variant covers, lots of them. And so you get this big speculator boom. But almost immediately, you get a very steep number 2 drop, unlike the first series, and you get an even steeper, or you get another steep drop to number 3. So the difference between number 1 and number 3 goes from almost 80,000 copies down to 46. And this is typical Marvel. This is often what happens once the variants are out of the way and we're into the comic. You've lost, in some cases, almost half your audience. But Here's where it's bad news for Ms. Marvel. The title continues to struggle. So we get that Civil War II arc, which really, I think, it hurt the character significantly. And there's been a lot of speculation. Did it do? Did it? What did it do? What did it not do? I think very definitive. If you look at these numbers, you look at the drop that happened. Remember, these are orders from the comic shop for the shelves. And what this indicates is retailers found they had a lot of Civil War II copies on the shelves. They started ordering less. And this title, which had a very stable line. Again, you go from the #1 drop down to #3. It's a very steep drop, and that's a problem. But look at #3 to about #8 there. It's fairly flat. It's, again, following the same curve as the first volume. But Civil War II, what they did with this character of Miss Marvel running the little secret prison and then regretting it, it tanked the comic. I think that it definitively the numbers do not lie. So we go from 30,000 down to, basically by issue 16, we're down to under 20,000. And now this is a terrible point for the comic. Again, and all the while, by the way, Marvel is hyping Miss Marvel. They are definitely promoting it heavily as being a book, everybody loves this, everybody is loving it, but yet it's selling under 20,000 copies. This gets worse. So by issue 24, we're down to 15,000 copies. And this is now, it's being outsold by several indies. And for a book that Marvel's really trying to put, they've got the character in the Avengers at this point. I mean, she's going to lead the Champions. Ms. Marvel is a heavy pushed character by the company. And their comic is down to 15,000. So what happens? They throw in an overship, and this time a big one. Rather than going from like 100 to 120, comic shops were ordering 100 copies, and they were receiving 300. So it was more than double what they were getting on Overships. And they went for this Miss Marvel and the family. You see a bunch of the other, and they really started to push this narrative of everyone loves Miss Marvel. They're dressing up like her. She's such a popular character. They really start to push that. And I think inside the comic, that only made matters worse. Fans do not like to be told, that hey, this comic is popular and everybody likes it. Why don't you? They don't like to be told what to like. So you see this happen, and then you see, so you have issue 25 with that overship, and then just a few months later, issue 31, they do it again. They do another overship, but notice what happens this time. They're overshipping less, but the bottom is less. So the retailers are ordering less. They're getting some free copies, not as many as they did with issue 25, but now we're even with the overship, we're just hovering at 20,000. And it comes back from it, it's down now. I mean, the series is dragging under 15,000. It winds up ending at 14,250. This is for this much hype behind this character, this is absolutely bad news. And then the picture gets worse. So they relaunch the series. Willow Wilson exits a comic at this point, and in comes Saladin Ahmed, and he goes for a brand new #1 issue. We get a variant cover out of this. It's going to be the Marvel's popular character. But even with all of that, including variants, it launches at 27,000. Why is that? Why is that catastrophic? I mean, the first series for this unknown character launched at 50. The second launched at 80. The third. The third is coming in under 30,000. This is for #1. And then #2 holds a bit, but then right away, we're down under 20,000 at 18,386 for issue 3. And it's dropping immediately. There's no plateau, there's no break-even period, there's no slow gradual decline. It immediately drops down to its base, but now it's finding its base was lower than the base for the Willow Wilson book. They do another overship here at issue 6, which gets it back just nursing above 20,000. It was as I recall, it was a double overship. It was like a 100 copies ordered, 200 copies delivered. It's still terrible. But we find it down at just at 12,000 by the time we get to issue 10. 12,000 copies sold. And then they throw another overship in, which takes us to 16. But as we're going to look at in a minute, the overships are declining. And in many cases, Marvel is overshipping as much as they did before, but the base order that the retailers are doing is so much lower. So at this point, we hit April. The pandemic hits. Magnificent Miss Marvel, the third volume, has been canceled, so we have a couple other issues here. All indications were it continued to hug 12,000, and I did hear that actually some of the issues coming out in the fall were hovering under 10. Now, if we look at the entire picture, here's what we get. It's a lot of comics, but you see the law of diminishing returns. Everything is decreasing. And you have a title that had achieved a pretty decent foundation to build off of. Again, 30,000 is nothing you get super excited about, but it is something to build off of, particularly for a new character. But rather than hold that base, they canceled the book, went into Secret Wars, relaunched it, did this terrible Civil War 2 storyline, and they took that 30,000 base. Again, this wasn't a base that hovered for 6 issues or so. This is what went 19 issues. It established that floor, and it reset the floor to under 20,000. And then it continued to reset that floor to under 15,000. And again, this is all through the midst of this. This is Marvel putting the character in the Avengers, saying this is one of the most popular characters of all time, all the rest. This is what's going on. Now, a couple quick things to mention here. The digital sales for Ms. Marvel were higher than Marvel's average. From everything I've been told, Marvel's average is around 8%. Ms. Marvel was somewhere around 12. So that's good, 12%. It's not really changing this picture any, but it's higher. It indicates that the market they're chasing is more likely to go to digital than print. So that's something. And then we're going to get to trade paperbacks in a minute, which do tell another bit of the story. But if you're looking at this, the takeaway should be, it is completely reasonable for Marvel to go, hey, this first series is actually doing pretty well. It's a brand new character. It found a base. The numbers are flat. And you'll see a stat in a moment that really was positive for that first version. With a little bit of care and tinkering, we can grow this. But instead, the tinkering they did caused it to decline heavily in the second volume and the third volume. So how does all this shake out? I just want to put this picture up. Here's the Overships, and again, it's illustrating the point. The Overships are, with the exception of the third and the fourth. Well, the fourth overship was slightly higher than the third, but look, it's just a downward line. And if we run a trend line here, it's just, even with the overships, it's again the law of diminishing returns, which suggests, and it's a video for another time, that maybe overships aren't as effective as a marketing tool as you might think. And maybe the company should rethink doing that. Taking an overship trend of 36,000 down to 16,000, there's nothing good about that. There's nothing, in terms of free marketing, free material, there's nothing good about that line. But if we look at just the 3 series and we do some trending based on all of them, what you'll see here is that from issue 1 to their final issue, or the issue I have anyway, you see some pretty steady drops. That second series really looks like a pretty extreme Marvel drop. It's definitely the classic Marvel drop, but it's that second half. Look at the first trend line for the first volume, 48 to 31. And I'm going to take away the first issues and trend from the third issue, and you see a much clearer picture of what was going on. And here's the great news for Marvel. In that first volume, 31,000 trended to 31,000. That's flat. That is, it's sad in comics to say flat equals success, but there is a lot, people wander away from things. It's true for TV. It's true for almost everything. There's very few series that trend up, and we're going to get to one of those in a few videos of a series that did that. But by and large, if you're Marvel and you're looking at a brand new character, no pre-existing anything, by a pretty unknown writer, and you've got a flat trend like this, you are ecstatic. This is great news. So that, in that first volume of Ms. Marvel, yeah, if you're Marvel, you have to call that a success. That is a success for you and your publishing house. But rather than dwell there, because I think you could read this and you could really go into a lot of depth around why flat is still pathetic. But in this industry, it's not. And the real headline is that second one. Look at the second one from issue 3 to the final issue, 32,000 to 11,000. That's a devastating trend. That basically means that your base left you. The base that you'd established in that first volume vanished and reset down to 11,000. And then relaunching in with a third, even for the short period, like look how fast it gets to 11. I mean, the second volume at least took 37 issues to get down to 11,000. In the third volume, in 13 issues, we're down at 11. And frankly, that's generous. So see how the red line actually goes under the trend line? They did 2 overships in the small time, which causes that line to be pretty false, falsely inflated. It is there's nothing good about where that landed. And it's I don't know. It's an interesting, and again, what isn't represented here is how much Marvel was absolutely pimping this book. So if we take a step back here for a moment, where did this all land? You know, first volume, 19 issue run, second volume, 37 issue run, third volume, I'm counting the first 13 issues. It did go on for a little further. But you look at our first issue, you know, where it started, our final issue where it wound up, and our low point. The low point in the first volume, 31,000. Again, fairly successful for it. The second, 12,900. The third, 12,000. But notice that that third volume got to its low point, you know, in a third of the time as the second volume with Overships. So here's some math to also look at. We look at the first volume of Ms. Marvel, 38% sales drop from 1 to 19. And then we go to if you just count issue 3, a 3% sales drop. And that's why it is fair, if you're Marvel, to say Ms. Marvel Volume 1 was definitely a success. No doubt about it. That's definitely fair to say. But here's the big headline again. In the trending, if you go from issue 3 to issue 19, like I mentioned, 0 drop, no drop. That puts Ms. Marvel in the top 5% of comics. And by the way, even including like crowdfunded and direct stuff, your second volume of stuff has a drop almost always. You rarely increase your odds. It also happens there. But in general, no drop is pretty unheard of. We look at the second version, and look at the second one, 82%. But even if you take away issues 1 and 2 and you go from issue 3, 56% sales drop. And look at our trends, 85% if you count everything, 66%. Marvel's average is 30. So volume 2 was a disaster. It's hard to say it any other way. And then volume 3 had similar bad numbers. The difference is with you know, starting from a much smaller place, 39% trend drop. A 39% trend drop starting from 18,000 copies is, I mean, almost 40% when you're starting from that low number is nonsense. So the last thing to kind of throw in here in terms of this analysis is let's look at the trade paperbacks. So this tells another story about why things are going in. And trade paperbacks, there's a lot of kind of confusing pieces here. So I'm just going to show you a bit. I'm going to show you the first 4 volumes we got from Ms. Marvel, which is really that first arc, the first set, the first launch, and the 4 volumes that came along with it. And this picture right here, volume 1, this is why Ms. Marvel was also seen as a big success. It debuted at just under 8,000 copies for the trade. And then look, over 17 months, what we're representing here is each one of these is a month. Over 17 months, a year and a half, the sales of this, again, did very, very well. And why I say it did very, very well as a trade is see the white line now here? This is Marvel and their typical trade performance. For books like the Avengers and Thor and bigger hitters, Black Panther even, this is what they typically do. They fall to 0, you know, in a year's time. Ms. Marvel has continued to have a lot of really nice aftermarket success. That first volume does well. Now, some people point out, you know, libraries are buying this and other things. Maybe, sure. It doesn't really matter to this picture. The money's coming in from somewhere. The point is, Ms. Marvel, the trade paperback, the first one, it definitely overperformed what Marvel was seeing. And that's why you see them continuing to invest in it. Volume 3 started from a lower place, fell faster, which indicates that, yeah, some people came in from volume 1, but it wasn't enough to hook them for volume 2. You look at volume 3, very similar line, but everything seems to, notice everything's falling down to the same place fastest. If I look at volume 2, 3, and 4, look how number 3 and number 4 volumes immediately fall to where volume 2 was. But volume 2 has been in the market 4 months longer. So what's showing here is they're all launching at about exactly the same spot, but the drop from month 1 to month 2 is bigger each time, which means, again, the audience is not growing, it's shrinking. But that first volume continues to do well. So it's an interesting picture. So where does this leave us? Well, hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight into what's going on with Ms. Marvel. I think it does answer a little bit of the question, why was Marvel Comics so high on Ms. Marvel? It's because that first volume did extremely well for a brand new character that they probably expected having some headwinds with. You know, as much as I don't think they would admit it in public, saying you've got a brand new female teen Muslim superhero is going to be a hard sell to the traditional comic audience that they've cultivated in shops for decades. So the fact that it did as well as it did is a sign of success. What it also shows, though, is how badly they fumbled the ball on Volume 2 and Volume 3. And how despite, I wish I could do a chart of showing the increase in marketing and hype and push for this character. It almost goes inverse to what was happening with the title. The more they hyped it, the more they pushed it, the worse it did from a sales perspective. So where does all this leave us? They've got Ms. Marvel on the shelf now. She doesn't have an ongoing series for the first time in a long time, because when they were relaunching them, they were canceling them and relaunching them the next month. And so I think they're trying to take a step back, take a breath, try and figure out what they need to do with this title to get the interest back and to get it back looking like number one. But it does represent, I think, another story for another time of what happens when you push a character, too much too fast. What's the outcome? Well, I think it looks a lot like these trend lines below. Anyway, I hope this is interesting for you. It's very fascinating to me because it really shows Marvel wasn't insane by thinking this character had a future and doing what they did in issue 1. Shows some of the effect of overships and the diminishing returns over time. And it also shows what happens with relaunches, things like Civil War II, which got in its way, Secret Wars, and just, how you can say as much as you want. You can hype that this is a new hotness and that everybody loves it, but, the numbers do tell a different story. Anyway, some interesting stuff. Hope you like this. Keep letting me know in the comments below what you want to see more of. I will continue to supply it. I've written down, every time somebody says, can you do this? I add it to a note, and I've got this long thing built up over time, and I'm hoping that I'll get to all of them eventually. They do take a lot of work, and some of the ones, like people like, can you do all of Hickman's Avengers? Like, sure, that's going to take me a lot longer. So I'm going to try and keep spacing up the really big ones to the smaller ones. And thank you for all the support and the kind words. People seem to like these, so that's cool. I'll keep doing them. And like, subscribe, share, introduce them, turn some people onto the channel, let them know this is here. Most importantly, as always, thanks for listening and watching.